The Remington 870 Tactical. This can fire 2 3/4 or 3-inch. You'll have to get rifled slugs, and you can also get a rifled barrel, but this one comes with, I believe, excess sights, as it says right here. So let's go ahead and get into my review of this shotgun. So today we're going to take a look at the Remington 870, but I want to kind of do this a little bit differently and just talk about my experiences and my opinion on this platform being what it is compared to some other options on the market. So also, pardon me, I've got my dog out here. She's you know, going to be doing her thing, sniffing around a little bit. So yeah, so you'll hear her a bit, so I apologize for that. So first thing I want to cover is the fact that this is a pump action shotgun, which is kind of obvious. Today, in my experience, there are plenty of shotguns on the market that are semi-automatic that actually are quite reliable, and some of them may be finicky with things like birdshot or whatever, and you can actually adjust the gas systems. You've got things that are pretty reliable and well known, like Benelli M4's Beretta. I think it's like the 1300 series or whatever, but you know, they are pretty reliable. Now, this thing kind of sets itself apart because, as the name implies, tactical. Tactical is not really meant to describe furniture. It's more a method in which you go about doing things. It's based on action, not accessories. So what this separates, the way this separates itself from like a typical 870 that you'd see in like a cruiser, is they would have typically like a bead sight. This has excess sights, as I showed in the intro, a breech choke for basically sticking it into something and pulling the trigger for like shooting out hinges or door locks or something like that. Obviously it has the rail on here so you can attach sights. And of course it has synthetic stock just like the other one that you would see. So here's a problem with this. You see this? 2 screws, one not there. That screw actually fell out a while ago. Oh wow. I would say it was about 5 years ago that it actually fell out, and yeah, I just tightened down these other screws, had to unscrew them and retighten them just so I could keep this rear sight, because the rear sight is connected to the rail. Huge flaw in my opinion, but it is what it is. Got to work with what you get, and it's not much with this one. It's not really secured very well from the factory, so I'd recommend doing your own adjustments on that. So with all that said, I do like the ghost ring sights with that big white front, but the problem is with this big white front, it's obviously rounded. So here's the problem with that. When you're doing these little micro adjustments on this rear sight, and you can do that, you know, with a little tiny screwdriver and such, you can do windage and elevation. The problem with that is it's rounded up top. So you've got to decide, do you want the white dot to be pointed? You know, you want it to be centered in the rear sight, and of course with these kinds of peep sights you kind of get to decide where the point of impact is when you're actually zeroing it. You got to decide the range and where the slug is going to hit, or buckshot, or wherever you want it centered. Now, not all rounds are going to perform the same, and so you kind of got to pattern your stuff, which I'll get into in another video with this shotgun. But the problem with that is I've always had kind of an issue with using the white dot, especially at range. It covers a big area, and it's probably better for patterning, for patterns rather than slugs. So I have it hitting a little bit high with my slugs. It's just kind of the way it turned out, and that was the best I could really do for like close range, long range, etc. So depending on the kind of slugs I even use, you know, PDX1 slugs are pretty much right on. The other slugs I have, like Hydra-Shocks, Federal Hydra-Shock slugs, those are shooting a little high, has a little bit more muzzle velocity, so the angle is a little more dramatic. It doesn't start falling immediately. Federal Deep Penetrator slugs, one of my favorite for all around, you know, game and stuff like that, and defense, deeper penetration. Typically slugs can be shallow penetrating, but they can still be devastating. So with all that said, the sights can be a help, but they can also be a burden. It does help you align it a little better. With a bead, you can be off by a little bit, and that can really affect you at long range, especially with slugs. In my opinion, it was really hard to get it down on exactly where the center was. With all that said, the next thing I want to talk about is the other feature, the breeching choke. Now, as I said, I already described what it's for, so I'm not going to get into that. But here's the thing. I'm not really going to be breeching my own doors in my house, which I would be using this for self-defense. It's one of the better things for self-defense, double aught buck, triple aught buck, or slugs or whatever. But anyways, the thing I would see this being useful for is contact. Basically, punching into someone's chest. These are pretty sharp, so it might hurt a little bit, kind of as a compliance tool. So the problem I actually have with it is it does walk out a little bit under fire, and that's been the way it's happened from the factory. You'd think kind of, you know, the carbon buildup and the heat will kind of keep it nice and tight. Not really how it works, and in fact, as it gets dirtier, this thing walks out a lot easier. So the cleaner it is, the more dry it is, the more the friction kind of holds it on. So just be aware of that, and it's going to be full open. But the good thing about this is that it does unscrew. It takes a minute to unscrew it, but you can put your own chokes on here. So here's the other thing. Just because it says it's tactical and it has an 18.5-inch barrel doesn't mean that you can't use it for, you know, skeet shooting or, you know, sporting clays, trap shooting. Because I actually did that. I actually competed in trap shooting with this exact shotgun, and I actually did pretty well. You don't need something big and fancy for that. So with all that said, the next thing I want to talk about is the price. So online, I was seeing regular 870s, you know, the ones that are like this, that have an 18.5-inch barrel, six round magazine and everything. They were going for about $320. And then this model was going for a little over $500, so it was about $200 more. Now, if you find it find it to be an advantage that you get, you know, sights on there, and you also get, you know, obviously an extended tube, and you also get a little choke on there, then that may be worth it to you. However, the problem with that is, if they're going to be put in as a tactical model, I would rather actually have Magpul furniture, and Magpul furniture as in just this right here. I don't need the 4-in-2 or forearm or whatever you want to call it. I don't need this to be this way. This is actually pretty slick. It doesn't really give you that good of grip, so I would actually use the Magpul one. That actually has a lot better grip in my experience, but these aren't too hard to take off. I'll do a video on that later. So anyways, you just got to keep in mind that you might have to spend a little bit of cash to update it if you want a little better grip, or just wear gloves or whatever, because I have slipped a little bit both ways when I was really sweaty or whatever, because this can be taxing on your forearm to try to keep a good grip and rack it and stuff, and the fact that it's already slick is kind of putting you behind the curve. So the next thing is, as I discussed, the action being a pump action versus a semi-auto. I don't really see this as being too much of an advantage today. From my experience and knowledge about semi-automatics today, you can find good priced semi-automatic shotguns on the market that are kind of laid out like this, and they have a pretty good advantage. Get some imported ones like some Turkish shotguns. They're really reliable, and that's one thing. Funny thing is, I've done videos about the Turkish weapons before, but I'm not going to get into that. But that's one of the things I'm going to actually look into, is upgrading from this to a semi-automatic, probably a Turkish one, or maybe a Beretta. But as far as cost goes, there's really not much of a disadvantage to go into semi-automatic to pump action. It's really not like it used to be, where it can be kind of tough to find one for a good price. So that's also something to keep in mind. But the versatility that the pump action has over the semi-automatic might actually change your mind on that. So the one thing I do like about the 870 is the ability to swap out shells pretty easily. So basically, my last video on reloads, you push in the magazine or the shell in the magazine, and it relocks it, so you can pull it back, and it's not going to shoot that shell from the magazine into here. So you can load like a slug or a buckshot or whatever, change it up. And one of the things that is good about that, for like having an 870, like if you're here in Alaska, if you go like out in the woods or whatever, you might have to watch for some critters like coyotes. You might want buckshot for that, or number 4 buck or something like that, something lower grade. And then if you see a bear, you can actually quickly change over to a slug and be ready to defend yourself. But you know, that's up to the end user. I don't want to really be firing bear slugs into a coyote or whatever, they're not as hard to penetrate, and you can do more devastating damage with buckshot than you know, you can to a bear for the most part. So anyways, moving on from that discussion, I do like the polymer furniture. The one thing that I did actually encounter was the stock actually started coming undone from the factory after a few hundred rounds, and it started wobbling. You have to take off the stock. Got two little screw holes here, and I'll do a video on this, taking off the stock, and it's how you exchange it. But not too many videos on that, but I'll go ahead and post a video. Might as well, right? Put out some information that I have. The Parkerized finish, it does oxidize. Trying to find these oxidation points that I saw. So on here, I don't know if you can see this scarring right here. Probably can. It's a pretty good camera, but you got scarring from the oxidation on here. That's one thing about Parkerization, is basically a rust to try to prevent rust. So you got to keep this thing oiled up when it's in storage, and it's kind of hard to stay away from humidity unless you're in like a desert like Arizona, where it's pretty much 0% humidity. But for the most part, kind of got to keep it oiled up. You might want to take it and get it dirt coated or something like that, Cerakoted, whatever. Get it in your Gucci FDE or whatever you want. So the next thing is the extended mag here. This is where it becomes a pain in the ass for me, because you have to unscrew this piece, and you can see it's damn near getting to the point of being threaded, because I get a little impatient. I pull out a Swiss Army knife, screw the flathead, and I don't have the Phillips head on that one, but it gets really close to stripping the screw, and that's one disadvantage. Is you can always get more, but I don't really want to have to order parts if I don't have to, you know. And I'm pretty sure all of you feel pretty much the same, right? But it is nice to have the sling swivel right here. It's pretty handy and stuff. The springs on this pump action, pretty easy to get a hold of, pretty cheap, so that's really not a big deal. But one thing I would recommend is cleaning out the magazine every now and then, because when you do shoot it, you will get some shit in the magazine. It'll build up over time. It's not really that big of a deal. You don't really need to oil pump action all that much, so that's one advantage to the pump action. But basically rambling at that point. So anyways, last thing I want to touch on is modifications I do recommend for the shotgun to kind of keep it up with everything else. So one modification I would do, I wouldn't recommend really using Loctite on this, because you do want to clean this out if you like to actually have your guns clean. If you want to, Loctite, I don't really care. That's just something I would do if you don't want this thing, you know, walking out like it was. I recently did the speed reload video, and it was walked out about that much. So that's actually a good amount from firing, you know, heavier loads like slugs or whatever. And I fired about 30 of them, not that much, but 30 shells out of a shotgun, it's a lot. 30 rounds out of like an AR or a pistol, not that much. So anyways, one thing I would recommend doing is getting a side saddle on. I'd recommend getting a side saddle so you can carry more. It's good if you're going to use it for home defense and you need to practice with it, obviously, but you know, it's not all that hard to do. Also, I'd recommend getting snap caps. You do want to protect the firing pin as much as possible. You don't want to have to get in there and replace the firing pin yourself. It's a pain in the ass, and I don't even want to do a video of how to take that bolt apart to get that firing pin in there, because I don't want to have to deal with it. I'll be cussing a lot, and I don't want to have to deal with that stress. So, of course, the modifications, I already mentioned the mag pull, forearm, whatever you want to call it. And also, I would get a butt shell carrier. And obviously, you got a sling here, but I wouldn't put any shells on a sling. For obvious reasons, they can come undone pretty easily. But I would get a shell carrier. You want to carry as many shells as you can and have a little bit of variety depending on what you're using it for. For home defense, you might just stick with buckshot and have your quick reloads right there. That's pretty good idea, in my opinion. So, you know, if you're going to be out here like in Alaska or whatever, you need to, you know, take it with you when you're out in the wild. I would carry buckshot, triple aught buck, double aught buck, number 4 or whatever, and maybe some different types of slugs if you want to deal with like coyotes or whatever. Use like standard Winchester slugs, and then standard Foster slugs or whatever. They're shallow penetrating, but they expand and they make a big boom inside of a doggy body. So yes, I'm referencing coyotes. So anyways, when you switch over, get Bernecki slugs, and those are good for bear, and you can basically take your keep yourself safe if you're a good shot from pretty much any animal here in Alaska, and we get some pretty big ones here. So anyways, this isn't a bad option. You can do better if you like semi-automatic, which I'm kind of wanting to get into the market on semi-automatic. I've worked with these things a lot. It doesn't really slow me down much. I do recognize it's the characteristics that give it a good advantage to people. It's good for beginners, good for experienced people, but for me personally, I'm going to upgrade to semi-automatic, and I'm probably going to lose a shell, like going from 6 to 5 in the magazine. Is that a big deal? Maybe not. But anyways, I do like the pump action for the fact that it keeps you responsible for your rounds. It keeps you pretty accountable. So that is one thing that I do like about it. It's having slugs in here. It's almost like having a modern day pump action old muzzle loader, being a 70 millimeter slug. Pretty devastating. So anyways, with all that said, I appreciate you guys watching. Go ahead and leave your comments below on your experiences with the 870 or 870 tactical. Really, let's stick within the 8.5 inch ones, not the little hunting models. These are more of the defense models and stuff like that, like the police use. I know you can get some surplus for a couple $100, the old police cruiser models, and that wouldn't be a bad idea if you're into this. I'm not saying this is a bad purchase. It's just, for me, I've worked with this long enough and I kind of want to upgrade. So anyways, go ahead and leave your comments below, give this video a like, and also subscribe, and you guys have a good one.